A very good evening, viewers. Welcome back to Swarajya. You're watching Swarajya Conversations. This is your host, Sharan Sethi. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. Uh, there were many things that happened in India and around the world this weekend, but we'll just skip over that and come to the point uh, as to why we have two really special guests joining us today, all the way from Israel, Yeshaya and Lev Aran. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Shalom and namaste. How are you? How was your weekend?
Namaste.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you. Namaste.
I've read your article you've written for Swarajya, and basically that went viral. And even I was surprised because when we had our earlier conversation, a lot of Indians themselves are divided on the topic of Savarkar, while a lot of Indians are also ignorant about him, where they don't know anything about Savarkar itself. But I have these two Israelis in front of me who really want to know India and want to know Savarkar in detail, and I want more Israelis to know about that as well. Yeshaya, can you begin with telling us why India and Mr. Veer Savarkar is actually your area of interest?
Good evening. Basically, I started out. I was interested in Afghanistan for the. I was interested in the connection between the historical connection between the Pathans and the Jews, which goes back to biblical days. From there, I got to classic Indian culture, and from there to modern Indian culture. I was very curious about the fact that I saw many similarities. I saw that India. I saw basically the similarity was in the fact that India had been founded by a socialist party, and now had been which had been taken over now by a right wing party. Party had ascended to power, and I saw great. It was even the same year it happened in Israel in 1967. But another thing that was similar was that although the right wing had won the elections, they had not replaced the other bases of power, the unelected bases of power, the academia, the culture, the deep state, the judiciary, etc. So I was in Israel basically in the last 20 years. The right wing has been ascending, has been trying to play on these fields also in the intellectual field and culture that had less success here in Israel. But I was curious how it worked in India. And for instance, there are areas where India is much stronger than Israel. The right wing has a presence in the cinema industry, which in Israel it has almost none. But and I was curious how it worked in the intellectual sphere, and I saw many similarities in a figure like Savarkar and Jabotinsky, who was one of the founding father of the Israeli right. And yeah, basically, I was interested in the Indian intellectual sphere because it was immediately clear to me that India has an intellectual elite. It's not a completely a country where there is no intellectual scene, but this intellectual scene is unheard of basically in Israel, and most Westerners don't know much about it either.
I think this is definitely a milestone in some way because one of the criticisms of the Indian left is that the Indian right is under intellectual in a sense of speaking, right? Uh, Especially in terms of their contribution to movies, in academia, and in media, and in general. But I think that is obviously slowly changing with the paradigm shifting towards the right. And we have people like Vikram Sampath who are writing today openly about Veer Savarkar, about the shortcomings, and also about what kind of a personality he was and what his vision was on a lot of subjects. Now, you said that there are similarities between the right in Israel and in India. Lev Aran, what do you think those similarities are? Why do you think Israelis actually show interest in India, especially in the recent times?
I don't think there are many countries that Israelis are that fascinated like India. Before the COVID, I think maybe, we are only like 80 lakh people in Israel. So it is estimated that 30,000 people after the army came to India on a yearly basis. And it means that India is a magnet for Israelis. And also, I came first time in 1991. Also, it was like 1 year after the army. And India changed also my personal life because Israel and India try to be, on one hand, an old civilization, and on the other hand, also a modern country. And not to be on a contradiction between the old civilization and the a modern country. They try to assemble it into, let's say, one unit. So I don't see many places. First of all, I think, if I'm not wrong, these are the only places that after the British left, they remained as a democracy. Remained is not a good word because it was not democracy under the British rule. But they became a democracy after the British rule. And the second thing is that still Israel and India are very much busy with their ancient past. And I don't see many civilizations outside Israel and India among the countries that the British or the French or the Italian left after the end of colonialism, that they are so busy with their identity. So in this way, in this sense, India was very. I was fascinated by India, and if we come back to Savarkar, Savarkar has asked himself a question that also Jews ask themselves. He was asking if Hindus are a nation or a religion. And I also think that Zionism started with this question: is Judaism is a nation that has a religion but still a nation, or it is only a religion? And we also had the internal feuds inside Judaism, if we are more of a religion or more of a nation. And both Savarkar and Jabotinsky, they were both rationalist and even atheist. And still, they are the, let's say, they're the main, they're like the icons of the Indian right and of the Israeli right. And the comparison is, of course, fascinating between them, but also between Zionism and Hindutva, and not only right-wing Zionism. This of course, very easy to show how Hindutva and right-wing Zionism are connected, but also left-wing Zionism was very much focused on the decision, not only question, even the decision, the political decision that Judaism is a nation, in the same sense that Savarkar was focused on the fact, for him it was a fact, that it is not Hinduism, it is Hindutva, it is a Hindu nation. Thank you.
So, when did you actually come across the concept of Hindutva? Because the distinction is difficult to understand even for the intellectual elites in India. I'm specifically talking about the left, right? So, Yeshaya, since you are into India studies, how do you make these distinctions, and especially with the Israeli intellectuals and everyone being generally termed as fascists and neo Nazis and all sort of things? So it becomes a no-go zone of sorts for intellectuals. So you have to brave those odds and actually study Veer Savarkar and all of these personalities and go beyond the binaries of looking at it.
Yes, well, first of all, it should be said from the onset that I have absolutely no interest in propaganda. I don't want to hear lies. I don't want to hear them from the left, and I don't want to hear them from the right. So basically, first of all, I'm interested in the facts. The facts, I believe, speak most eloquently for themselves, and you should do your best to find them out. So, yes, it's correct. For instance, when I read the paper that I grew up on, when I was born in Israel, but my childhood was in New York, when I read what they say in the New York Times, it's just outrageous. It's completely divorced from reality. It is nothing but propaganda. Many times, it's sometimes it's from left wing Indians or radical academics in America. Sometimes it's from Americans who probably can't even read a word of Hindi and or Marathi, whatever it is. But again, I think people should do their best to try to find out the facts, go beyond this inflammatory rhetoric, and yeah, you'll get this kind of stuff. excuse me, you'll get this kind of stuff in Israeli newspapers also. The in the intellectual Haaretz, the hardcore left wing Haaretz. Um, Basically, again, the same thing. To be honest, I have the same. I come from a religious right wing family. I learned in a rather liberal religious seminary in the settlements. Otniel, if one is familiar with Rabbi Menachem Fruman of blessed memory, he was a peace activist. He was rabbi of a settlement and a peace activist. So basically, I'm used to being tarred and feathered by the media. Ever since I grew up, they were saying these things about the right wing. They honestly portrayed if you're familiar with the fundamentalist project that was done at the University of Chicago in the 80s, they put the settlers and the Hindutva followers in the same category as Al Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood and things like that. So I'm used to it. I have like an immunity, and I don't really take it too seriously. Basically I think I don't want, just as they deal in. I don't want to deteriorate to stoop to their level. I don't want to deal in propaganda. I will deal in facts the best as I can, and I believe that in the end the truth will win. That's what I believe in.
Well, it's really good that you're being optimistic. Maybe I'll take this question across to Lev Aran. When you look at this propaganda, to a certain point, you can ignore it. But I think both Israel and India, speaking beyond a nation state paradigm, I think are growing conscious of the civilizational history that both the countries had, in a sense of speaking. So, which is why talk about Hindutva, talk about that rising comfort, especially in the youth, about embracing their religion, about their way of life, or whatever you may call it. So, in a sense, is actually growing, right? So, when you see these parallels of Hindutva being compared to Al Qaeda and everything, logically speaking, where does that place all of this, Levan?
I think that in Israel we are in a unique position because I feel that unlike Europe, we can digest much easier and not only the right wing forces. I think that also centric voices in Israel, we can much easily digest the fact that people say we are not a religion, we are a nation, because it is also the path that Judaism went through. And now I think it is like many people around the world, even people that don't like the West Bank, even people who feel that Israel should compromise with Palestinians, still you will ask them, are Jews a nation or a religion? They will tell you Jews are first of all a nation. So in a way, I feel that we Jews, we can understand how come people say, okay, maybe from outside you think that we are a religion, but actually we are a nation. Okay, and those who are Hindus, Sikhs, Jains, and Buddhists, they all belong to the Hindutva camp. Okay, it is not like Hinduism is the same as Hindutva. Hindutva is a national thing, not a religious thing. And the second thing is that I wrote for Shaya was speaking about Haaretz newspaper, and I wrote an article about the RSS for Haaretz. And I made an interview with Dataji, with the general secretary of the RSS. And I can say that personally, I came to the conclusion that if some mobs are lynching a Dalit or a Muslim because he wanted to slaughter a cow, Dataji is against it as any any other person, Indian person from the left wing forces or parties. It is not that you can take the RSS and say, oh, they're like pro lynching and the left forces are anti lynching. This is something you read in the newspapers. And once you come to India and you delve into what is RSS, you see that simply it is not true, that the RSS has projects. RSS wants to protect the cow, it wants to protect the Article 25, but it does not want people who want to slaughter the cow, he doesn't want them to be murdered by a mob. So it is not the real picture as I saw it when I came to India last time.
Absolutely. I
Yes,
mean, if we were
if I may
actually,
add,
yes,
if I
yes,
may just add a word, I think it's as Lev pointed out, it's very important not to try to gloss over and defend the wrongdoings of your own camp just because of tribal instincts. This is a big mistake because in the end, what happens is if you consistently turn a blind eye to the wrongdoings of your camp, in the end it will collapse on you. It will lead to self destruction. So I think this is a it's very important not to overlook the wrongdoings of your camp and to try to honestly deal with them.
I agree with you, but for anybody who witnesses the media or who watches the media, and being a journalist myself, I try to avoid news most of the time, and I only rely on sources that can be actually trusted. You see, when you look at the statistics for mob lynching or anything that you may hear negatively about India, it goes beyond the binaries. Obviously, Hindus are a majority people here, and we have been for thousands of years, and you cannot change the fact that we exist, right? But in a sense of speaking, even with especially with cow smuggling and the lynchings that you hear about, there is one particular community who actually commits a majority of the crime, and this is according to the government of India data. And you can just compare that over the last several years, and you'll be shocked to find out that it is actually not the Hindu community. And I'm not trying to communalize this, right? So that's the age of the internet that we live in. If I actually put out uncomfortable statistics that speak a story for itself, but that doesn't suit a certain narrative which the media is trying to play out, you have no ground for criticism, basically, if it doesn't suit their narrative. Since we are actually talking about journalism, so how does it work in Israel? Because we were talking about political personalities and what convergences and divergences they may have. But in terms of the media, what are the similarities and what are the differences that you observed? Especially because Indian media by itself is a caricature of its own. You must have realized
Yes.
by now.
Yes, yes. So immediately it should be said that courage all over the world is a rare commodity. Again, courageous people are rare and will always be rare. It takes very few people have the spine necessary to take unpleasant stances. I think that social media, again, I will take, usually people say that social media is divisive and that it amplifies your own echo chamber and it amplifies rage. I would imagine is true. People with knowledge of algorithms say this, but on the other hand, I will also point out something that is not pointed out much. That nowadays social media has also led. People talk a lot about fake news. I think social media, on the contrary, has led to more truth being said, not more lies. I'd love to see an empirical analysis of this, but I think nowadays, in other words, the conspiracy theories were always around. If you wanted to read, an Arab newspaper like El Haram in Egypt, saying that when a shark bit a tourist in Sinai, it was the Mossad that sent the shark. If you wanted to find that stuff, you could always find them. But nowadays, for instance, if there is a story going on in I don't know where, anywhere in India, and beforehand I had to trust the New York Times that their correspondent was telling me the truth. Nowadays on social media, any man in a village with a cell phone can show me exactly what happened. So I think social media in that sense, and this villager can go viral and have I don't know how many millions of views. So I think in that sense, social media has had a positive effect, in which anyone who wants to know the truth has more of a chance of knowing it, both from the amount of information on the internet and from the social media, where anyone can be a journalist.
I
And
think in India as well, it was very similar because only a particular section of elites who went to Cambridge and Oxford could be considered intellectuals. I mean, I don't mean to be racist about this, but we had a lot of white people telling our own history even after India's independence. And I think people wanted to say that out aloud, but they were too afraid that they'll be called out. Uh, so, with the right rising, and especially with the rise of Narendra Modi and the political Hindutva that we see today, I think even journalists, even the common man, is voicing out his opinions. Maybe not as articulately as you see, from the other elites in the media, but at the end of the day, they are not afraid anymore of, saying that we are proud to belong to a particular community and we are tolerant as a community without being gaslit for a very long time. In fact, what was surprising for me even more as an Indian trying to learn more about India and Israel as civilizations was during my interactions, in my earlier capacity with a lot of Israeli guests that I would speak to. And interestingly, they would say that, it's not all hunky dory that you see Israel and America's relationship being. like two best brothers or something like that. And basically, there's a lot of anti-Semitism even in the media in America, and we're talking about the best of the guys over there. And I was completely shocked to actually learn about that, Lev Aran.
Okay, so I will. I think if you talk about America, I think it is better that Shaya will take it.
Yes, I'm a bit more familiar. Well, I will say also, one can look. There are books that have been come out about the history of the New York Times, as you know, as the paper of record in America. There's a book written by a man who I believe is living in Israel. The book is called The Gray Lady Winked." Another story was called. Another book was called "Buried by the Times," about how the New York Times actually actively suppressed the genocide of the Holocaust, the genocide of the Jews, and part of it was the troubled relations that the ownership who had with their Jewish identity. It's interesting story to understand. But yes, there is anti-Semitism in the American establishment, both in the media and I'd like to point something out that none of the almost none, I believe none. I'm not familiar to the last man, but almost none or none at all of the foreign reporters in Israel actually speak Hebrew. They get their information, they only speak English or French or whatever it is, and they get their information basically from the English edition of Haaretz, which is radical left. And, again, ask yourself, how many reporters in India speak a local language other than English? You of course, I have a friend who's in the intelligence community, and he tells me that if you read the paper in Morocco or Tunisia, if you read the paper in French of the elites and you read the paper in Arabic, of the masses, you will get two different stories, and also the foreign media will only view Israel through the prism of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. They will take absolutely no interest in the fact that Israel has, maybe they'll report a little on high tech or cyber or that kind of stuff, but they will take no interest, for instance, in the cultural scene in Israel, how Israel has, some of the best orchestras, both Western and Eastern in Israel. They will take no interest in just basically anything that comes in here that doesn't have Palestinians in it. It's sad to say this, and I wish I could say to the contrary, but that is the truth.
There is a huge difference even here in the way in which news is covered by the regional media where local languages are spoken and even the English media. And to be honest, as somebody who is an English journalist, it's not a matter of shame for me to admit that we are farly outshadowed and outcast by the local languages. And I think that's a positive sign. People are sticking to their mother tongues. They're speaking the language that they're comfortable with, and they're receiving the news in the way in which they want to receive certain information of news, which is why, especially when journalists have this moral dilemma and they try to sort of have the mantle for themselves and say that whatever I say is right and the way that you think it is actually wrong, is what upsets me personally as a journalist, because at the end of the day you're supposed to report facts, and facts can be perceived in any way you want. That's the thing about truth as well. Truth can be a perception. What is true to you cannot be true to me, but facts remain the same nevertheless. But without going into the philosophical debates of it,
Yes.
uh, Lev,
Um,
you've been an advocate for better relations between India and Israel, and you've visited India, you love India, and you're trying to understand the true essence and fragrance of India. Uh, Beyond, say, the strategic partnerships and the agricultural ties and whatever you see in the news, where do you think Israel and India as a civilization is headed for the future, and what do we need to work on?
so I think that in this sense, Savarkar is very important because Savarkar was writing in Marathi. He was not only writing in Marathi, he gave Marathi more than 200 new words, as far as I know. So he was like a modern Marathi poet. And one big, I cannot say I cannot say it is a problem because I'm an Israeli and I want to be modest. Okay, I don't want to teach Indians how they should be Indians. Okay, I think it is. Uh, I don't think it is proper to put it this way. But I can say that first time that I came to India in 1991, even if an English newspaper had a circulation that was maybe 25% of a Hindi circulation, still it was more important than the Hindi newspaper. Not because more people read it, but because who were the people who read it? Okay, the English reading elite was more important not because of its numbers, but because of its place in the Indian psyche. And if I see a big revolution of Savarkar and today of Modi, is that the vernacular languages of India today are more important than they were in 91. If I look at the circle around Modi, I try to think who are the people that English is their mother tongue, a minority among them. If I look at other governments, even right wing governments, even Vajpayee governments, okay, a majority among the people around were still people who went to English mediums, and English was their best language. They could write English better than any other language, better than the language that their mother and father spoke to them. So, in this sense, I feel that the culture bondage between Israel and India is important because in Israel, the most important language is Hebrew. By far, it is more important than English. Okay, Haaretz newspaper is more important than Jerusalem Post, not only because of the circulation, only because it is highbrow, also because it is Hebrew. And I feel that we don't have enough cultural connections and also political cultural connections.
Right.
If people in Israel don't know Savarkar, who is the most important and influential today, a political theorist of New India, he is more important than Mahatma Gandhi. I know that for some Indians it is painful to hear it, but I'm sure that today Savarkar is more relevant to Indians than Mahatma Gandhi. The political theory, okay? I'm not speaking about personality.
Right.
And still, Israelis know nothing about Savarkar, who loved Israel, who praised Israel, who knew quite a lot about Israel. So something is wrong about our mutual connection. So it is not enough the weapons that Israel is selling to India and agriculture and so on. We also need the cultural connections that today we lack, and we need to think how to put it because the problem is not only between right wing and left wing media outlets. It is also between highbrow and lowbrow because you belong to Swarajya. You do not only belong to a right wing media. You also belong to a highbrow media. You check 24 times before you publish something. How many media houses are doing what you are doing? I'm not sure many of them. Okay, so the issues that we need to, the bondage that we need to put between India and Israel is not only the defense and not only the agriculture, it is also the cultural and the political culture.
Lev, what you just said about Mahatma Gandhi and Veer Savarkar will go viral on the internet, and I'm going to assure you about that. Because a lot of Indians, including powerful right wing politicians, want to say it and subscribe to the thought that you just said, but are too afraid to say it out aloud. So I think they go to a closed corner where they can yell it out and then take all their frustrations out and say that I actually believe this, but in public life, I actually can't tell anything against Gandhi because Gandhi is sort of this figure who cannot be criticized always. By the way, that's one more thing that's been happening off late, especially with the rise of media. Yes, Les.
Sharaj, I'm interrupting because it is like part of my personal history because when I came to India, I saw lots of volunteers in many places and they are helping and they are doing. And I think for a decade, I was sure that they are like post Gandhians. And only after a decade, I understood that they are all RSS people. Me myself, I did not understand they are RSS. I was sure that they're like belong to Vinod Bhave and the Gandhian and so on. So also for me, it took a lot of time to see that even the service in India, the Seva, today more belong to the RSS than to post-Gandhian activists today in India. So I'm sure it is. Um, I'm sure it is not something that only I can see it. I'm sure Indians see it crystal clear as much as I see it. I think so, at least.
Yeshaya, do you want to say something? Because I know that you've been holding a lot of
Yes,
your
yes.
thoughts.
I wanted to point out that Gandhi, first of all, of course, is a brand name, right? He's one of the biggest, greatest icons. You know, Gandhi and the Taj Mahal are basically and all that an American knows about India. That's it. So again, I don't think Gandhi. People might have their grievances against Gandhi, but of course, I subscribe to the fact that he was a man of excellence, and small people, small mistakes, great people, big people, big mistakes. But yes, I think the only way that you were talking about, Lev mentioned quality journalism. The only way in which the Indian right or the Israeli right will achieve prominence, cultural prominence, is through excellence. There is no other way. I don't want to stoop to bullying tactics and to lowbrow, crude behavior. I don't want to do this. I mean, sometimes again, politics is not a sterile exercise. We all know what political rallies look like. But again, even politicians, they have to have at the bottom line, they have to have responsibility for the decisions they are making. And you talk about journalists saying unpleasant facts. Politicians have to make unpleasant decisions if they know that that is the correct thing to do, and that there will be grave consequences if they don't. So the only way forward is through excellence. And if you go back to the original encounter that the Jews and the Indians had with the West, if it's Ram Mohan Roy or Moshe Mendelssohn in the West, was a very interesting comparison between the two figures. They were both, great minds that saw the cultural superiority of Europe, cultural and technological, and yes, cultural superiority of Europe at the time. And in the beginning, for many years, for hundreds of years, this was an issue that India and the Jews grappled with. And they had an inferiority complex towards the West. That how did the West do this? And our cultures have deteriorated. But nowadays, thank God, our cultures are rising, and we no longer have to, see ourselves as servants of the West. We don't have to. We should have no inferiority towards them, nor should we have a superiority complex. We should deal with them as equals, and we should have honest conversations with them in which we are candid about our strong points and about our weak points. And once you have honest conversations, and they can be very fruitful, and again, excellence is the only way forward.
Yes,
I
and
think
it
those
comes with a
honest
price.
conversations are beginning with one like this. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but Lev, I would like you to make your closing comments if there's anything that you would like to say, followed by Yashai, and we'll wrap up this session.
Yeah, I would just say that people in Israel, they know Modi very well. They don't know Hindutva well enough, and I think it comes with a price. And if Israelis knew better, the political theories in India, left and right, and Indians knew better Zionism, even if it would cause, it comes with a price. If you know something, you know somebody, then maybe maybe you will have not only positive things to say about him, okay? But I do believe that we don't know well enough each other at the basic levels, and we should improve it.
Yeah, I follow up on what Lev said. I think in order to have a deep relationship between civilizations, you have to not only know current events and follow Swarajya or Shekhar Gupta or whoever it is. You have to, or in Israel, the equivalents in Israel. I'd be hard pressed to think the best newspapers I think in Israel are in Hebrew. Lev writes for one of them, Makor Rishon, who does not have an English site, unfortunately. But yeah, I think culture can not only be just following the news or reading Wikipedia entries. You have to have a knowledge of classical culture in order to have a deep understanding. I mean, anyone who will try to understand Israel and not have any knowledge of the Bible or of even minimal concepts of Jewish classical culture, mysticism, etc., won't be able to fully understand it. So I hope that eventually there will be programs opened. Finally, it's long overdue. Programs open for Jewish studies and Israel studies in Indian universities, and maybe Bollywood will make it here finally and make it here big. Now Netflix people can watch this. So yeah, I hope and religious scholars have a lot of very fascinating Indian religious texts. Even though Jews historically have a troubled relation, with the icons, etc. But I think the texts are fascinating, and the religious experience of the temples is something that Jews, even rabbis, Rabbi Yuval Sherlow wrote, and his wife wrote, a very prominent rabbis in Israel wrote about this. How seeing the temple at Amritsar was an interesting topic, which is very interesting for them to understand what a temple is. So yeah, I think there's yeah, I just hope that it continues and it deepens, and it's done on a very serious and good level. It's done very well.
I think we're already beginning to see the results of it, especially in recent times, and I'm very confident that with conversations like these, a lot of Indians and Israelis are going to get to know each other. And I hope we can invite a lot of people to collaborate, to engage, and to discuss a lot of issues that are of mutual interest. But I'd like to thank you, gentlemen, for joining me today. It's been fascinating having this conversation with you. And you've spoken with such clarity, confidence, and conviction that even Indians who are in the political sphere refuse to speak, with. Thank you so much, Yeshaya Rosenman and Lev
Thank
Aran. Thank
you,
you so much. It's
Shanti.
been
Thank you
joining me
so
today.
much.
It was a pleasure. Shalom. Good evening. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please do subscribe to Swarajya. We have been actively working behind the scenes to produce a lot of shows like these so that you can watch the conversations on a daily basis, and that requires your support. And the only way we are asking you to support is to subscribe to Swarajya on YouTube channel and to follow us on our social media pages. This is your host Sharan Sethi signing off until next time.